So we're switching from content creator to publisher, now over to some brands. And right now I'd like to introduce Kelly Yao, who will be speaking to Dan Sloan from Nissan about their newsroom. Kelly Yao, who, by the way, is creator of a lot of this content today, a content creator.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning. Today we're really pleased to have Dan with us. Dan is the editor-in-chief of the Nissan Media Center. Nissan has been one of the few brands that have a full in-house content creation factory. So we're really excited to have Dan join us and tell us more about that. Welcome, Dan.
Morning, everyone. Morning, Kelly.
Morning, Dan. So you've been, before being at Nissan, you were a journalist for 15 years, and this is a photo of the Nissan factory in Japan. How has your journalistic background, facilitated your current role, and also to what extent is content creation like a factory?
Well, I'll start with the first question. The previous speaker, talked about an audience's detection of being talked down to or being hit over the head with an advertorial, and we like to think in journalism there's a higher so what bar, meaning that let's make something impactful that is not just a constant creation element, but something that will resonate, that will engage, and hopefully you'll be proud of. We're starting with a picture of a factory in Japan. Manufacturers in Japan have a process called monozukuri, making things essentially. And Nissan, we've kind of said kotozukuri is the story about making things. But that's not, it's not watching factory lines. It's the kind of breadth of what you're doing and how you convey the story behind the people, products, technologies, geographies, the different things that are a facet of your brand story. So the process of the media center has begun about 3.5 years ago in April of 2011. And a lot of what we did, this is not a template for success, it's kind of how it happened. And it's constantly still evolving in the content we create. But what we've kind of seen over time is there's lots of similarities to a content factory, to a traditional factory. If you think about its R&D and market analysis that goes into what product you decide to make, then the actual production of that product, then the distribution of that product, then the engagement with your consumer. You do analysis of what they like, what they don't like, how they're using your content, and then you do the whole thing over again. So to some degree, we're going to come to kind of more granular elements of this, but I think in our case in particular, content factory sounds kind of like you're just pumping it out, but it's a process, and I think that has something that we've established over 3.5 years.
Right, and I think, we've seen that the relationships with brands, agencies, and certainly the media have changed somewhat when we've got such an emphasis on generating great content. How has that impacted Nissan and your work in terms of doing it yourself, essentially?
Well, Vice is a perfect example of how media itself is evolving, and it used to be a very I think a kind of linear relationship between corporates, their advertisers or agencies, and the way they would reach out to consumers. I guess I'm kind of talking pre-internet here and kind of traditional TV, radio, print spend. But I don't think brands were very creative in how they would kind of engage on their own. They kind of trusted and paid agencies to be the owner of making that content, and sometimes even to their own staff, which seems kind of ridiculous in a way, but there's still a great deal of money being spent on internal comms content. And with, inherently with a do-it-yourself, if you will, newsroom or media center, you're going to be closer to the story, and hopefully you'll be able to communicate both externally and internally, more convincingly, and tell people something that they didn't already know.
So content forms a huge part of what you do. What is the role of content in Nissan? Because I think one of the big challenges brands have, certainly, aligning internal stakeholders, is that if you want to build a content factory or a newsroom, indeed, of your own, what is the real purpose of it, and what are the outcomes that you're looking for?
So there'll be a little bit more about the genesis of Media Center itself, but I think what you initially need is a reason to be, and air support from those, that this can't just be a boutique operation. It has to be something that's fully aligned with your communications and your marketing and your digital strategy. To some degree at Nissan, we've kind of seen all 3 or 4 of those areas converge over the last 3.5 years. And there's been a lot of discovery. The process itself, we brought in teams of ex-journalists, but we weren't marketeers, we weren't particularly digitally savvy, but you learn very quickly, and you learn by era. So I would say as a process, we've kind of detected the ways that we can get our message out most effectively, and that's visually. When we first started, I thought, oh, great, let's get a lot of auto journalists who, can write glowing prose about the industry. And in fact, the reality is attention spans are very short, and there are other media out there already who are doing that, and no one's going to come to your brand for that. They want infotainment, but a sophisticated, in a sophisticated storytelling that obviously supports their interest and their kind of sustained desire to be a brand advocate or ambassador. So this is an element of, traditionally, as I mentioned, so a corporate pays an advertiser gets the consumer. Well, if you can get to the consumer yourself more directly, they almost become an advocate, or they do the lifting for you, essentially. They share content. As I'm sure Zach King knows, it is a very, it's kind of a circle of positive flow. If someone likes something or someone shares something, a lot of the work is done and you don't have to spend money.
Right, and how did the content factory become a reality? Was that already in existence before you came into the role, or is that something that you actively pursued and created yourself?
In Nissan's case, it did not exist before April of 2011, and at that time we had just put our marketing and communications teams together, and I used to joke, well, the joke was that we were the love child of marketing and comms, and I used to say, who's the father, who's the mother? But the point was that in any situation like this, just being a good idea does not mean you're going to get corporate buy-in, i.e., to tell a good story, we need to get to our R&D centers. We need doors open. We need people who will tell us things that normally they would not share with traditional media, and you have to build a trust. So a lot of this, again, back to that initial shot, is via stories that help and display that you're an honest broker and you're capable of doing this and handling what sometimes is proprietary information, but getting out in a very engaging way a story. And so, over time, it's gone from trying to get doors open to kind of an overflow of internal requests, be it, we have both Nissan, Infiniti, and Datsun. Datsun, has just come on in respective markets over the last 2 years or so. We have more than enough internal demand for us to make things. That's great. And as you can see in a picture up there, we have a traditional studio that was built over that first summer in 2011. That gives us a lot of freedom. We've dabbled and still do our own programming in Japanese and Mandarin, and did it in English for a while. And we really use that for a lot of live messaging or messaging, which, as our topic is on ROI, it's incredibly cost effective. It's expensive to build when you start, But then if you think, well, okay, well, that's not $10,000 to $15,000 I'm spending every time I want to hire a contractor team to do an interview, ultimately it's paying for itself. And I should just say, so in the concept of social, I think you'll see some outstanding, Vice, for example, very high production quality, beautiful video, and that's the level to achieve. On the other hand, you have to live within resources sometimes, and social has been a very cost-effective way. For example, we do a lot of live content, be it car debut, financial results. These are things that, if we did it in the past, we used to pay for satellite feeds and absurdly expensive trucks and things like that. In the age of social and live streaming, it's basically cost negligible now, and you get 40,000 people watching. So it's, the effectiveness of social media has been to reduce cost, among other things.
It'd be good to have a look at the videos that you've prepared for us, of the content that you've created. Should we go to the video?
I think it should roll a little longer.
For more than half a century, motor racing has drawn crowds in Japan. But for motorsports fans, one Grand Prix stands out: the 1964 meeting at Suzuka. It was a day the Skyline legend began.
There's one more piece of content. I'll just speak to that. You could roll the next one too. But obviously you saw a lot of archival footage, as well as that video continues, the kind of modern update. And literally corporates have treasure troves of these kind of visual movie tone news assets that when you incorporate it into a modern story, it makes it more compelling. So if you could roll the other one, which is a much more recent video that was shot and edited in Thailand. That's the same one. So I believe it's the one after, but you can just stop there.
For more than half a century, motor racing has drawn crowds in Japan. But for motorsports fans, one Grand Prix stands out: the 1964 meeting at Suzuka. It was a day the Skyline legend began.
I think it should immediately follow right now. Yes. You can stop there. Yeah, this goes on for a while. But what I was trying to do is present, if the first story was kind of a heritage story, if I was to peg it in a genre, where the second one is a little bit more like an agency commercial, perhaps. The storytelling proceeds after that, and certainly you can't not know that it's about a Nissan truck in Thailand. But we do a lot of different ways. There's not the single voice of how we do the storytelling, and for reasons that a different audience wants a kind of a different way to be addressed. But the bottom line is that they ultimately must be interesting, and at least to the people who make them. There's no defined guarantee of garnering an audience, or as someone was saying, you can't say, well, we're going to make a viral video. It will be, and maybe you don't even want to, but you want a continual voice that is very, elevates your brand. And again, from these three elements that we have here, what the media center has evolved into is beyond just asset creation, managing our distribution, working with our digital team, and then getting the information about how that content is being used, so that when we refine the process, we can better judge who's going to be watching and for how long.
And it seems as though the content, there's a variety of content on there, and I think a lot of brands assume, doing it myself actually costs quite a lot more, because you've got the internal head count and other issues. In your experience, does it save money to do it yourself?
Well, those two videos you just saw, with the exception of getting 2-3 people to Thailand, had no cost implication beyond what we'd already budgeted. So, obviously, and particularly the second one, the editing quality and the camera work was outstanding, and yet that's already, that person's already on our team. We're not throwing out $50,000 to $150,000 just to make that piece of content. It's already part of the marching orders for how we're going to approach not just that story, but every story we do. But to that second piece, again, when we began, we were really looking to kind of make a big picture impact. Let's get our global narrative going. Primarily the audience or markets that we're looking at would be Japan, Asia, China, and North America. But increasingly, we call ourselves the global media center, and thus we need to literally reflect all the places where we're doing business and localize that content in the language or in a storytelling style that would actually fit better the audience of the country. So that piece in Thailand, well, there are shorter versions as well, but there are certainly versions in Thai that we have to boot. I think we're gonna, yeah. Okay, so this is really the core of our discussion, I think. So, what does it cost to make a video? And defer to other colleagues and other brands, but an ROI for a do-it-yourself operation, you can just say, what would it have cost if we went externally to make the same piece of content? And if you want to say, even beyond that, are you going to pay for distribution beyond just, making it? So primarily we use social media, YouTube in particular, as a distribution channel, and for our analysis, we have on limited occasion done kind of paid placement as well for particularly, if you want to say exciting videos that we're going to resonate. But, literally, most of what we do is kind of cost negligible. People are there, we cover the story, we edit. These are people and bills that have already been signed off on, and it doesn't accrue extra spend. And if that, the next slide I think is saying, so honestly, what would you pay for 2 or 2.5 minutes of somebody's attention? If you get, or have 2.5 million people watching for 2.5 minutes, what's that worth to you? $1? 50 cents? I don't, I think it's an extrapolation of what ROI can be for these type of operations. But overall, and perhaps other brands have different KPIs, but we are part of marketing communications, and we're trying to contribute to better brand share of voice, ultimately overall opinion about the brand or product, and ultimately it is, while it's not directly correlated to people coming to showrooms, our sales going in the right direction? Are we seeing the overall measures for any brand? Our sales and profits going up? Oh, hello. So again, just coming back to that earlier point about what we do, we are increasingly trying to tie in these contents to other digital strategies. Wow. We do absolutely monitor views, what's being said in social media platforms, and how we can engage or tailor future content to speak to that audience.
Well, I think we're running out of time now. So in summary, Dan, where next for you and your team, and where next for the Nissan approach for content?
We are kind of at a moment where you could say it's Media Center 2.0, where we're trying to say after 3.5 years or 4 years, how can we take the Content Factory idea and really expand it to be a global operation? And that's going to require a lot more integration with respective teams that are overseeing product or manufacturing in different places, and really keeping and getting more local to the audience or consumers that we're trying to reach. Multiple languages. Essentially, we're 4 or 5 languages already, but you're going to see more content that is, Thai only, or Bahasa Indonesian only. Those are steps that we're going to take, but we're going to need, obviously, the cooperation of other people across our brands to make it happen.
All right. So in summary, we've heard that from you, that really looking at ROI, that creating content yourself can mean a cheaper option, and also that assigning a monetary value for how the amount of time that you can catch someone's attention really helps align people internally to recognize the monetary value that content can really bring.
Absolutely. No one we don't have a brief to tell my bosses what our ROI is, but it certainly helps if you can, say, by the way, I think we're paying for ourselves.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Dan. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.